Beyond the wall, in the frozen silence where even wolves fear to howl, an ancient evil stirred. While kings and queens butchered each other for a chair made of swords, something far older than their petty kingdoms began its march southward. The Night King did not want power. He wanted extinction, and no throne, no army, no dragon had ever posed a threat quite like the one that brought winter's final silence with every step. Long before the wall rose into the sky, before the Seven Kingdoms were even conceived, Westeros belonged to the children of the forest. These ancient beings, small in stature but vast in magic, had dwelled in the wooded lands for thousands upon thousands of years. They sang to the trees, carved faces into the weirwoods, and lived in harmony with the natural world that breathed around them. Then came the first men. They crossed the land bridge from Essos with bronze axes and burning torches, cutting down the sacred weirwoods and claiming the forests as their own. The children watched as their ancient groves fell, as their homes burned, as their way of life faced extinction beneath the boots of human invaders. War erupted across the continent. For generations, the children fought desperately against the tide of humanity. They shattered the land bridge with powerful magic, creating the stepstones and the broken arm of Dorne. They flooded the neck, transforming it into an impassable morass. But still the first men came, relentless and numerous as locusts. The children of the forest faced a terrible choice: continue fighting and face annihilation, or create a weapon so powerful that it would drive the invaders back into the sea. They chose the weapon. In a sacred grove far to the north, the children gathered for a ritual that would stain their souls forever. They had captured a man, one of the first men who had burned their forests and slaughtered their kin. He struggled against his bindings, terror flooding his eyes as the children surrounded him. They bound him to an ancient weirwood, its face carved in eternal agony. One of the children approached, holding a shard of dragon glass that gleamed with malevolent purpose. The man screamed, begging for mercy that would never come. The children had learned cruelty from their enemies. The dragon glass plunged into his heart. Magic older than memory flooded through the man's body. His screams died in his throat as ice spread through his veins like poisonous roots. His skin paled to the color of winter itself. His eyes transformed from brown to burning, glacial blue that held no warmth, no mercy, no humanity. The children stepped back from what they had created. Before them stood no longer a man, but something else entirely. The first White Walker. A creature of ice and death, immune to age, to pain, to the weaknesses of mortal flesh. A weapon forged from desperation and dark magic. For a moment, the children believed they had found salvation, but they did not understand what they had truly unleashed, for the magic that created him did not bind him to their will. It did not make him their servant. It transformed him into something beyond their control, beyond their comprehension. The man they had sacrificed ceased to exist. In his place stood a being driven by a single, absolute purpose: to bring endless winter, to silence all warmth, to transform all life into frozen death. The Night King was born. At first, he seemed to obey. He turned his terrible power against the first men, raising their dead to fight for him. The children watched in horrified fascination as their weapon proved more effective than they had ever imagined. Corpses rose at his command, their eyes burning with the same ice-blue light, their bodies moving with inhuman strength. Victory seemed within reach, but the children had miscalculated catastrophically. For every first man the Night King killed, his army grew stronger, For every battlefield corpse that cooled in the snow, a new soldier joined his ranks. Death itself had become his recruiting tool. And soon, the Night King's cold gaze turned upon his creators, the children of the forest, who had birthed him in desperation, now faced the consequences of their hubris. The Night King did not distinguish between human and child of the forest. To him, all warm-blooded creatures were simply fuel for his ever-growing army of the dead. He began taking human babies, performing dark rituals in the frozen wastelands beyond the world's edge. Each infant he touched transformed into a White Walker, expanding his command structure, creating generals for his legions of whites. The children realized their terrible mistake too late. They had created a weapon that could not be sheathed, a curse that could not be lifted, an extinction-level threat that viewed all living things as nothing more than future soldiers. The Night King gathered his forces in the lands of Always Winter, that mysterious realm beyond even the furthest reaches of the known world. There, in the eternal frozen darkness, he built his army, whites by the thousands, White Walkers to command them, and at the center of it all, the Night King himself, patient and terrible, preparing for the conquest that would drown the world in ice. But the children of the forest had not yet given up. Recognizing the apocalyptic threat they had unleashed, they made a desperate alliance with their former enemies. The first men and the children of the forest united against their common doom. Together, they would face the long night. Together, they would fight for the right of the living to continue existing. Together, they would stand against the frozen darkness that marched inexorably southward. But none of them truly understood what was coming. None could comprehend the scope of the horror that approached. For the Night King was not merely powerful. He was inevitable, and the world was about to learn what true darkness meant. 8,000 years before the Mad King burned his enemies alive, before Aegon the Conqueror rode his dragons across the narrow sea, before the Andals invaded or the Rhoynar fled, the long night descended upon Westeros like a funeral shroud. It began with winter, but not the winter that men knew, the seasonal cold that arrived and departed with reliable rhythm. This was something else, something older, a winter that had no intention of ever leaving. The days grew shorter and shorter until they disappeared entirely. Darkness claimed the land, unbroken by dawn for a generation. The cold penetrated deeper than bone, freezing rivers that had never known ice, killing forests that had stood since the world was young. And in that darkness, the dead walked. The Night King led his army southward in a tide of frozen death that consumed everything in its path. Whites moved in their thousands, then tens of thousands, an unstoppable tsunami of reanimated corpses that felt no pain, knew no fear, and could not be reasoned with. Entire villages vanished in a single night. Men went to sleep beside their fires and never woke, rising instead as mindless servants of the cold. Women clutched their children as the darkness took them, their screams freezing in their throats. The babies the Night King did not transform into White Walkers simply became more whites, tiny corpses shambling alongside their reanimated parents. The White Walkers rode dead horses at the vanguard, their ice weapons shattering steel swords like glass. Wherever they passed, the temperature plummeted. Breath became visible even indoors. Water turned to ice in cups. Life itself recoiled from their presence. The Night King walked through it all, silent and terrible, his eyes burning with cold blue fire that seemed to peer into the very soul of the world. The armies of men tried to stand against the onslaught. They failed. Traditional warfare meant nothing against an enemy that grew stronger with every casualty. Each fallen soldier became a weapon turned against his former brothers. Each battlefield became a recruiting ground for the army of the dead. Castles fell. Kingdoms crumbled. The desperate survivors fled ever southward, but the long night followed, patient and relentless. The children of the forest fought alongside humanity now, their ancient magic blazing against the cold. They hurled fire and called upon the old gods for salvation. But even their power seemed pitiful against what they had created. Despair settled over the world like snow. But in the darkest hour, when it seemed that all life would be extinguished from the world, a hero emerged from the ranks of humanity. Azor Ahai. The legends say he was a warrior without equal, wielding a sword called Lightbringer that burned with the fire of the sun itself. According to the ancient tales, he had forged this blade through terrible sacrifice, plunging it into the heart of his beloved wife Nisa Nisa to quench the steel and awaken its true power. Whether the legends speak truth or myth, none can say for certain. But something turned the tide of the long night. Azor Ahai led humanity in a final, desperate stand against the darkness. At the battle for the dawn, the living made their last stand against extinction. The clash of armies echoed across the frozen world as fire met ice in cataclysmic fury. The details of that battle have been lost to the mists of time. But when the fighting ended, the Night King retreated. He was not destroyed. The dead could not be killed in any conventional sense. But he was driven back, pushed northward into the frozen wastes from which he had emerged. The long night lifted. The sun returned to a world that had forgotten its warmth. In the aftermath, the survivors erected the wall. It rose 700 feet into the sky, a massive barrier of ice and ancient magic that stretched across the northern border of Westeros. The children of the forest and the first men wove powerful spells into its foundation, creating a mystical barrier that the White Walkers could not pass. The Night's Watch was founded to guard this wall for all eternity. These men would take no wives, father no children, own no lands. They would dedicate their lives to standing watch against the darkness that lurked beyond the edge of the world. But as centuries passed into millennia, memory faded. The long night became legend. The White Walkers became children's stories told to frighten the young into obedience. The Night's Watch transformed from honored guardians into a dumping ground for criminals and unwanted sons. Westeros forgot the true purpose of the wall. Men laughed at the old warnings. "Winter is coming" became a mere house motto rather than a dire prophecy. Only the wildlings beyond the wall remembered. Only they still feared the darkness that waited in the frozen north. Only they understood that the long night had not been defeated. It had merely been postponed. And in the lands of always winter, in the frozen darkness where summer never reaches, the Night King waited, patient as glaciers, inevitable as winter itself. He had all the time in the world. The living did not. For 8,000 years the Night King slumbered in the frozen darkness beyond the wall, not dead, not dormant, waiting. The world changed around him. The first men merged with the Andals. The Targaryens conquered Westeros with fire and blood. Kingdoms rose and fell. Dragons disappeared from the world, then were reborn in fire. But the Night King remained, patient as ice, gathering his strength in the perpetual winter of the far north. And then something changed. magic began returning to the world. Daenerys Targaryen walked into fire and emerged with 3 dragons, creatures that had been extinct for over a century. The Red Priests of Hralar reported their visions growing stronger, their fires burning brighter. The children of the forest, thought extinct, revealed themselves to still exist in hidden groves. The weirwoods whispered, with voices not heard in generations. The world was waking, and so was the Night King. Beyond the wall, in the haunted forest where even the wildlings feared to venture, the first signs appeared. Rangers of the Night's Watch vanished on routine patrols, leaving behind no trace except mysterious spiral patterns carved into the frozen ground. Dead bodies began appearing in impossible arrangements. Corpses of wildlings formed into grotesque symbols, their body parts positioned with deliberate, artistic cruelty. These were not random killings. They were messages. But the Night's Watch, depleted and demoralized after centuries of quiet, dismissed the warnings. Wildling raids, they said. Natural deaths. Superstitious nonsense. They were catastrophically wrong. The White Walkers had returned. At first, they moved in small numbers, testing the defenses of the living, probing for weaknesses. A patrol of Night's Watch Rangers encountered them in the darkness beyond the wall. The men's screams echoed through the frozen woods as ice swords shattered their steel blades. Their bodies rose moments later, eyes burning blue, joining the ranks of their killers. The sole survivor fled south, deserting his post in terror. Eddard Stark executed him for breaking his vows, never truly believing the man's ravings about dead things in the woods. But the dead things continued to gather. At the Fist of the First Men, the Night's Watch established a ranging camp, confident in their numbers and their position atop the ancient hill. They believed themselves safe, prepared for wildling attacks. They were not prepared for what came in the darkness. The Whites fell upon them like a winter storm, overwhelming the camp in minutes. Hundreds of Night's Watch brothers died screaming as the dead tore them apart. The snow ran red with blood that quickly froze in the terrible cold. The survivors fled in panic, abandoning their supplies, their dignity, their brothers. They ran through the snow as the dead shambled after them, relentless and tireless. Only a handful made it back to the wall alive. The Night's Watch finally understood. The old stories were true. The White Walkers had returned. The army of the dead was real. But who would believe them? In the south, Westeros tore itself apart in civil war. The War of the Five Kings consumed the continent as Stark fought Lannister, as Baratheon clashed with Baratheon, as Greyjoy raided the coasts. Kings and would-be kings slaughtered each other for crowns and thrones, blind to the true threat gathering in the north. The Night's Watch sent ravens begging for help, warning of the apocalypse approaching beyond the wall. The ravens were ignored. The lords of Westeros were too busy killing each other to care about northern superstitions. And in the frozen wastes, the Night King continued building his army. Wildling settlements disappeared overnight. Entire tribes vanished into the darkness, their populations added to the growing horde of whites. The free folk, who had lived beyond the wall for thousands of years, found themselves hunted by an enemy they could not fight. Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, understood what was happening. He united the wildling tribes not to invade the south, but to escape the north. 100,000 wildlings marched on the wall, desperate to cross to safety before the dead consumed them all. The Night's Watch saw only invaders, they saw enemies to be stopped. They did not see refugees fleeing annihilation. Jon Snow understood. The bastard of Winterfell, now a man of the Night's Watch, recognized the truth that others refused to see. The war was not between wildlings and Night's Watch. The war was between the living and the dead. But understanding came too late for many. At Hardhome, a wildling settlement on the northern coast, Jon Snow witnessed the true power of the Night King for the first time. He had sailed there to evacuate the free folk, to bring them south of the wall, before the dead could claim them. He arrived just as the darkness descended. The attack came at dusk, swift and merciless. The whites poured down from the hills in a tsunami of dead flesh, thousands upon thousands of corpses moving with singular purpose. They felt no pain when stabbed. They did not slow when limbs were severed. They simply kept coming, climbing over their own destroyed bodies to reach the living. The wildlings fought with desperate courage. Warriors who had survived beyond the wall their entire lives stood their ground against impossible odds. They killed dozens of whites each, hundreds collectively. It did not matter. For every white that fell, the Night King simply raised more. Every wildling who died in the battle rose moments later as his enemy. The mathematics of death were inescapable. The living could only decrease in number. The dead only increased. Jon Snow fought in the chaos, his Valyrian steel sword Longclaw proving effective where normal steel failed. Valyrian steel could kill White Walkers, shattering them into ice. But there were too many whites, too many enemies, too much death. He made it to the boats with a handful of survivors, evacuating those he could save. Behind them, Hardhome descended into massacre. Thousands of wildlings died on those frozen shores, their screams echoing across the water. And then, silence fell. Jon Snow looked back from the boat, his breath frozen in the Arctic air. On the wooden pier, the Night King stood alone, watching the survivors escape. His armor gleamed like winter starlight. His eyes burned with cold fire. Around him, the dead stood motionless, awaiting his command. The Night King raised his arms slowly, almost casually, and the dead rose. Jon watched in horror as every corpse, every wildling who had fallen in the battle, stood as one. Thousands of bodies climbed to their feet, their eyes now glowing ice blue, their allegiance now belonging to the darkness. In a single gesture, the Night King had added an entire army to his forces. But it was not the military victory that chilled Jon's blood. It was the message. The Night King stared directly at Jon Snow across the water. No words passed between them. No threats were spoken, but the meaning was clear. I am coming. I am inevitable, and nothing you do will stop me. Jon Snow returned to the wall knowing the truth. The greatest threat Westeros had ever faced was not Cersei Lannister's schemes, not Daenerys Targaryen's dragons, not the political machinations of the great houses. It was the patient, unstoppable force of extinction that marched slowly southward, adding to its ranks with every step. But even Jon, who had seen the Night King's power firsthand, did not yet understand the full scope of the horror. For the Night King possessed abilities that transcended anything the living had witnessed. His very presence transformed the world around him. Wherever he walked, winter followed. Not gradually, but immediately. Temperatures plummeted. Storms erupted from clear skies. Blizzards manifested at his whim, blinding and freezing his enemies, creating perfect conditions for the dead who felt no cold. He could raise the fallen with a simple gesture, transforming entire battlefields into recruiting grounds. Every arrow that found its mark, every sword that took a life, every successful defense simply provided him with more soldiers. His touch could convert living babies into White Walkers, creating generals for his army, beings of terrible power who commanded the whites with his will. How many children he had transformed over 8,000 years, none could say. But each one extended his command structure, multiplying his effectiveness. The Night King possessed a supernatural awareness that bordered on omniscience. He could sense when Bran Stark used his green sight to spy on him, perceiving the young Stark's consciousness across time and space. In a vision of the past, the Night King reached out and grabbed Bran's arm, marking him. That mark changed everything. The magic that protected the Three-Eyed Raven's cave, powerful wards that had stood for thousands of years, shattered the moment Bran entered with the Night King's mark upon him. The sanctity was violated. The barriers fell. The White Walkers poured into the cave like a frozen flood, slaughtering the children of the forest who had protected Bran. The ancient beings who had created the Night King died by his hand, their magic insufficient against what they had unleashed millennia ago. The Night King could perceive magic itself, tracking those who wielded it, hunting down threats before they could fully manifest. He was not simply a warrior or a general. He was a force of nature given terrible purpose and near limitless power. But his greatest strength was not his magic, it was his patience. He did not rage like human kings. He did not make impulsive decisions driven by ego or anger. He simply moved forward, methodical and inevitable, adapting to obstacles, learning from each encounter, growing stronger with every passing day. When the wall blocked his path, he did not assault it futilely. He waited. When Jon Snow proved difficult to kill, the Night King did not pursue recklessly. He calculated. When dragons appeared, creatures that should have been able to destroy his forces with fire, he did not retreat. He prepared a trap. The Night King understood that time was his greatest weapon. He was immortal. His enemies were not. He could afford to wait decades, centuries if necessary. The living could not. Every winter that came and went reminded Westeros of his existence. Every strange cold snap whispered of his approach. Every unexplained death beyond the wall added to his forces. The Meisters recorded falling temperatures across the continent. The summers grew shorter. The winters grew longer. Year by year, season by season, the world tilted toward eternal cold. And still, the lords of Westeros fought each other for crowns and kingdoms, blind to the approaching apocalypse. Still, they dismissed the warnings from the Night's Watch as superstition. Still, they believed walls and treaties and armies would protect them. They did not understand what Jon Snow had learned at Hardhome. The Night King was not an enemy to be defeated in battle. He was not a rival to be outmaneuvered politically. He was not a threat that could be bought off or negotiated with. He was the end of all things, patient and inexorable, and he was coming for everyone. The living squabbled over scraps while winter gathered its strength. They played at war while extinction sharpened its blades. They treasured their mortality while immortal death prepared to claim them all. But the Night King's greatest triumph still lay ahead. For he had watched the world change, and he understood what the return of magic meant. Dragons had been reborn, and soon one of them would be his. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Beyond, the wall, a small army of whites surrounded Jon Snow and his desperate ranging party. They had ventured north to capture a white, to bring proof of the dead to Cersei Lannister, to convince the Queen of the South that the true war was not between Lannister and Targaryen. It was a suicide mission, and the Night King knew they would come. He had allowed them to capture a single wight, isolated from the hive mind that connected his army. He had let them believe they might succeed, and when they found themselves trapped on a frozen lake, surrounded by thousands of wights, he waited. He was waiting for the dragons. Daenerys Targaryen received the desperate raven from beyond the wall and made the choice that would doom the world. She flew north with all 3 of her children, her beloved dragons, to rescue Jon Snow and his men. The Night King watched the sky as 3 shadows approached through the storm: Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, creatures of fire and magic, the last dragons in the world. They were magnificent, ancient power made flesh, the very weapons that could have destroyed his army with cleansing flame. They were exactly what he needed. The dragons descended upon the frozen lake in fury, breathing fire that vaporized wights by the hundreds. Drogon landed to collect the survivors, while his brothers scorched the dead from the sky. For a moment, it seemed the tide had turned. For a moment, fire triumphed over ice. The Night King had been waiting for this moment for 8,000 years. He stepped forward through the smoke and steam, his generals parting before him. In his hand, he held an ice javelin, its surface gleaming with impossible sharpness. His eyes tracked Viserion as the dragon wheeled through the air, breathing fire across the army of the dead. The Night King's arm moved with inhuman strength and precision. The javelin flew. It struck Viserion in the throat with the force of a ballista bolt, punching through dragon scale that had turned aside. Arrows and swords. The impact was catastrophic. Viserion's scream echoed across the frozen wasteland as he tumbled from the sky, his wings folding, his fire extinguishing. Daenerys watched in horror as her child fell. Viserion crashed into the frozen lake with devastating force, shattering the ice, disappearing beneath the black water. His blood steamed in the cold air. His death cry faded into terrible silence. One of the last 3 dragons in the world had fallen. But the Night King was not finished. He hefted a second javelin, his arm cocking back to throw at Drogon, who struggled to take flight with the weight of all the survivors on his back. Jon Snow saw the threat. He screamed a warning. Drogon beat his wings desperately, lifting from the ice just as the second javelin flew. It missed by inches. The survivors escaped into the sky, fleeing south on Dragonback, leaving behind Viserion's corpse in the frozen lake and the army of the dead standing victorious on the shore. They thought they had paid a terrible price but survived. They did not understand what the Night King had truly won. For hours, the Whites stood motionless around the shattered ice where Viserion had fallen. They did not advance. They did not pursue. They simply waited, patient as the grave. Then, as the sun set behind the wall, the Night King approached the lake's edge. He gazed into the dark water where the dragon's body lay. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his arm, his fingers spreading as the familiar magic coursed through him. The magic that raised the dead. But this was no mere corpse. This was a dragon, a creature of ancient magic, born in fire, powerful enough to burn cities. Could even the Night King's power claim such a prize? The water began to freeze. Ice spread across the lake's surface, crackling and snapping, forming faster than nature allowed. The temperature plummeted even further. The very air seemed to crystallize. And then, movement beneath the ice. Something massive stirred in the depths. Something that should have been dead. blue light began to glow beneath the frozen surface, growing brighter, more intense, illuminating the darkness. The ice exploded upward. Viserion rose from the lake, water and ice cascading from his scales. But he was no longer the creature Daenerys had named and loved. His scales had paled to the color of winter itself. His eyes burned with the same glacial blue fire as the whites. The wound in his throat gaped open, frosted with ice. He was beautiful and terrible, a perversion of everything dragons represented. The Night King had done what no one believed possible. He had killed a dragon, and then he had claimed it as his own. Viserion spread his wings, water streaming from the membranes. He threw back his head and roared, but the sound was wrong. It was the scream of winter winds, the crack of glaciers breaking, the howl of the void. The Night King climbed onto the dragon's back, settling between the spines with practiced ease, as if he had been born to ride. For a moment, he sat motionless, a king upon his terrible mount. And then Viserion took flight. The dragon of ice rose into the northern sky, his wings beating with terrifying power. The Night King rode him as conquerors once rode dragons to burn cities and topple kingdoms. But the Night King sought not to conquer. He sought to destroy. The army of the dead began marching southward. 100,000 whites moving as one. White walkers riding at their flanks, and above them all a dragon of ice carrying death made manifest. They marched on the wall. For 8,000 years the wall had stood. 700 feet of ice and ancient magic, a barrier between the living and the dead, the last defense of humanity against the long night. The spells woven into its foundation by the children of the forest had held for millennia, keeping the White Walkers trapped in the frozen north. The wall had been built to last forever. It was about to fall in a single night. The Night King flew Viserion to Eastwatch by the sea, the eastern fortress on the wall. The Night's Watch garrison there saw the dragon approaching and felt a moment of hope. Dragons meant Daenerys Targaryen. Dragons meant help. Then they saw the eyes. Viserion descended upon the wall, and the Night King commanded his mount to unleash its breath. But instead of fire, ice erupted from Viserion's throat. The blue flame was cold beyond imagining, beyond anything the natural world could produce. It was the breath of absolute zero, the exhalation of entropy itself. Where it touched the wall, the ancient ice did not melt. It shattered. The magic woven into the wall's foundation screamed as it was violated. Spells that had endured for 8,000 years unraveled in seconds. The fundamental forces that bound the structure together simply ceased to function. The wall exploded. Millions of tons of ice collapsed in a catastrophic avalanche, crushing Eastwatch and everyone within. The sound was like the ending of the world, a thunder that could be heard for hundreds of miles. The ground shook as if the gods themselves were dying. Where the wall had stood, a massive breach gaped open to the north. The barrier was broken. The last defense had fallen. The path to the south lay open. The Night King urged Viserion through the breach, soaring over the rubble of humanity's greatest achievement. Behind him, the army of the dead poured through like a flood of winter incarnate, 100,000 whites shambling into the lands of men. The long night had returned, and this time there would be no Azor Ahai to save them. Ravens flew south bearing news of the catastrophe. The wall had fallen. The dead were coming. Winter had arrived in force beyond anything the living had prepared for. In Winterfell, Jon Snow received the news with grim recognition. He had known this day would come since Hardhome. He had warned them all. Now, the war he had dreaded was upon them. Daenerys Targaryen mourned Viserion even as she prepared for battle. One of her children had been taken from her, perverted into a weapon against everything she fought for. The pain was beyond bearing, but she could not afford to grieve. Not yet. Sansa Stark fortified Winterfell with desperate efficiency, calling in every able-bodied fighter from across the north. If the dead would come, they would face them at the ancient seat of House Stark, where the kings of winter had ruled for thousands of years. Bran Stark understood more than anyone else. As the three-eyed raven, he could see the pattern forming, the threads of fate weaving toward a single point. The Night King was coming for him specifically. The living memory of the world was the true target. Because the Night King did not simply want to kill humanity, he wanted to erase it. Every green seer, every three-eyed raven who had ever lived, held within them the memories of the world, the complete history of humanity stretching back to the dawn of time. They were living archives, repositories of everything mankind had ever done, ever learned, ever been. If the Night King killed the three-eyed raven, he would erase those memories. He would delete humanity's past, making their future extinction complete. They would not simply die. They would be forgotten, as if they had never existed at all. Bran understood that he was the bait. The Night King would come for him, and when he did, that would be their only chance. The army of the dead marched south through the haunted forests and frozen fields, growing larger with every mile. Wildling settlements were consumed and added to the horde. Northern holdfasts fell in the night, their populations rising to join the enemy. Every victory for the living was temporary. Every victory for the Night King was permanent. At Winterfell, the greatest army the North had assembled in generations prepared for the battle of their lives. Northmen stood beside wildlings, ancient enemies united by existential terror. The Knights of the Vale brought their cavalry. The Dothraki horde, who had never seen snow, prepared to face an enemy stranger than anything in their legends. And Daenerys brought her two remaining dragons, Drogon and Rhaegal, creatures of fire ready to burn the dead. They dug trenches and filled them with oil. They forged weapons from dragon glass, the volcanic glass that could shatter White Walkers. They built barricades and positioned catapults. They did everything tactically possible to prepare. It was not enough. It could never be enough. The dead did not need food. They did not need rest. They did not feel fear or pain or doubt. They simply marched, tireless and inevitable, and every defender they killed joined their ranks. The mathematics were inescapable. The living could only lose. On the day of battle, as the sun set behind Winterfell and darkness claimed the land, the temperature plummeted. Breath frosted in the air. Weapons became painful to hold. The blizzard that always accompanied the Night King descended upon the castle, reducing visibility to nothing. And in that white-out darkness, they heard it. The sound of 100,000 corpses shuffling through the snow. The dead had arrived. Jon Snow stood on the battlements, peering into the storm, trying to see the enemy. But there was only darkness and swirling snow. The Whites were invisible in the blizzard, approaching unseen, an army of ghosts. Someone made the decision to send the Dothraki cavalry forward, their weapons lit with fire by Melisandre's magic. Thousands of riders with flaming araks charged into the darkness, their war cries echoing across the field. For a moment, the flames advanced into the storm like a wave of hope. Then, one by one, the flames began to go out. The defenders on the walls watched in growing horror as the lights vanished into the darkness. They heard the screams. They heard the clash of battle. They heard the terrible sounds of men and horses dying. And then, silence. The Dothraki horde, the fiercest cavalry in the world, had been annihilated in minutes. Thousands of warriors gone, their flames extinguished, their bodies claimed by the dark. And worse, those bodies were now the enemy. The Whites erupted from the darkness like a tidal wave of death. They crashed against Winterfell's defenses with inhuman fury, climbing over each other, forming living ramps of corpses to scale the walls. Dragon glass and Valyrian steel cut them down by the hundreds, but for every White destroyed, 10 more took its place. The defenders lit the trenches, creating walls of flame that should have been impassable. The Whites simply walked through the fire, their bodies burning as they shambled forward, caring nothing for the flames consuming their dead flesh. Daenerys and Jon took to the sky on Drogon and Rhaegal, breathing fire across the army of the dead, incinerating thousands with every pass. But the dead kept coming. The tide was endless, and somewhere in that darkness, the Night King watched and waited. Parte 4, Final. The battle descended into chaos. Winterfell's walls became slaughterhouses as Whites poured over the battlements in endless waves. Defenders fought back to back, their arms growing heavy with exhaustion, their dragonglass blades dulling from constant use. Every inch of ground was contested. Every room became a tomb. The Whites felt no exhaustion. They simply kept coming. Edison Tollet died holding the gate, crushed beneath falling Whites even as he saved Samwell Tarly. Lyanna Mormont, the fierce child lady of Bear Island, was grabbed by a white giant and crushed in its grip. With her dying breath, she stabbed Dragonglass into its eye, taking the monster with her. Beric Dondarrion, the man who had died and returned 6 times, spent his final life protecting Arya Stark in the corridors of Winterfell. The flames that had sustained him guttered and died as Whites tore him apart. His purpose finally fulfilled. Theon Greyjoy, the broken boy who had betrayed the Starks and spent years being tortured into something less than human, found redemption in Winterfell's Godswood. He stood guard over Bran with a handful of Ironborn, knowing he would die, choosing to die protecting the family he had wronged. Heroes fell, legends died, and still the dead came. Above the battlefield, Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen searched desperately for the Night King through the blizzard. If they could find him, if they could kill him, the entire army would fall. Every White was connected to him. His death meant their destruction. But the Night King was nowhere to be found. Then, through a break in the storm, Jon saw him. The Night King sat astride Viserion high above the battlefield, watching the slaughter with those terrible blue eyes. He made no move to join the fighting. He simply observed, patient and terrible, as his army consumed Winterfell. Jon urged Rhaegal toward him, Daenerys following on Drogon. The 2 living dragons chased the dead one through the storm, breathing fire that Viserion dodged with unnatural agility. The Night King showed no fear, no urgency. He simply flew, leading them away from Winterfell, away from the battle, away from Bran. Jon realized the trap too late. The Night King wheeled Viserion around suddenly, and the dragon of ice opened his jaws. Blue flame erupted forth, not at Jon or Daenerys, but at Rhaegal himself. The ice fire struck the living dragon across the face and wing. Rhaegal screamed in agony, his flight faltering, ice spreading across his scales. Jon clung desperately to the saddle as the dragon spiraled downward, crashing into the snow far from Winterfell. Daenerys tried to pursue on Drogon, but the Night King had already vanished back into the storm, returning to Winterfell, returning to Bran. In the Godswood, Theon Greyjoy stood alone. His Ironborn warriors lay dead around him, torn apart by wights. The courtyard beyond the sacred grove was a sea of the dead, and they were coming. Hundreds of wights shambling through the snow toward the heart tree where Bran sat in his wheelchair, seemingly oblivious to the carnage. Theon gripped his spear with shaking hands. He had one dragonglass-tipped weapon and no hope of survival, but he had found something in this moment that had eluded him his entire broken life. Purpose. "Theon," Bran said quietly, his voice cutting through the moans of the dead. "You're a good man. Thank you." Those words, from the boy he had pretended to murder, the family he had betrayed, meant more than any crown or glory ever could. Theon Greyjoy smiled, and then he charged. He ran at the approaching horde, screaming a wordless war cry, his spear lowered. He knew he would die. He chose to die fighting, die protecting, die as something more than the tortured creature Ramsay Bolton had made him. The wights swarmed him. He stabbed and slashed, taking down 3, 4, 5 of them before they bore him to the ground. He felt their hands tearing at him, felt the cold spreading through his body. But he had bought seconds, precious seconds, and in those seconds the wights parted. The Night King walked through his army, his white walkers flanking him, his footsteps leaving frost in the snow. He moved with terrible purpose toward Bran, toward the three-eyed raven, toward the living memory of humanity. This was the moment 8,000 years of patience had built toward. The Night King reached for the sword on his back, the blade of ice that had ended countless lives. He approached Bran slowly, savoring the moment, his blue eyes fixed on the boy who held all of humanity's memories. Bran stared back, unafraid, waiting. The Night King raised his blade, and Arya Stark dropped from the sky. She had climbed the heart tree in silence, moving through the branches with the stealth the faceless men had taught her. She had waited as Theon died. She had watched as the Night King approached, and she had leapt. The Night King heard her scream. His hand shot out with inhuman speed, catching her by the throat in midair, lifting her off the ground. Her dagger fell from her hand, tumbling toward the snow. For a moment, their eyes met, the ancient evil and the young assassin, the bringer of eternal winter, and the girl who had trained in the house of black and white, who had looked into the face of death itself and learned to fight back. The Night King's grip tightened. Ice began to spread across Arya's skin. She was dying, but she was also a Stark, and Starks did not yield. Her other hand moved. She caught the falling dagger, the Valyrian steel blade that had once been used in an attempt to murder Bran, the weapon that had passed through so many hands, waiting for this moment. Arya flipped the dagger to her other hand and drove it upward into the Night King's abdomen. Valyrian steel pierced his armor. The blade that could kill White Walkers found its mark. The Night King's eyes widened. Not with pain, but with something that might have been surprise. Perhaps, in 8,000 years of existence, he had never considered that he could lose. Cracks of blue light spread from the wound, racing across his body like lightning through ice. His grip on Arya's throat loosened. His sword fell from his hand, and the Night King shattered. He exploded into 1,000 shards of ice, his body disintegrating, his ancient existence ending in a heartbeat. The fragments of his form caught the light for one beautiful, terrible moment before falling to the snow like frozen rain. Behind him, the White Walkers exploded in sequence, each one shattering into ice. And across the battlefield, 100,000 whites collapsed simultaneously. The tide of death that had been crashing against Winterfell's walls simply stopped. The whites fell like puppets with cut strings, their eyes dimming, their bodies becoming mere corpses once more. In the sky above, Viserion screamed one final time. The dragon of ice plummeted from the clouds, his massive body crashing into the field beyond Winterfell's walls. The blue fire in his eyes extinguished. Daenerys's child was finally at rest. The blizzard began to clear. Silence fell across the battlefield, a silence more profound than any sound. The defenders of Winterfell stood among mountains of the dead, their weapons still raised, unable to comprehend that the battle had ended. They had won. Humanity had survived. The long night had been defeated. In the aftermath, as the sun rose over Winterfell for the first time in days, the survivors gathered the dead. So many had fallen. The funeral pyres burned for days, the smoke rising into the clear sky like prayers to gods who may or may not have been listening. Jon Snow found Arya in the Godswood, standing where the Night King had shattered. She stared at the spot in silence, the dagger still in her hand. "You saved us all," Jon said quietly. Arya didn't respond for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant. "I killed death, but death always comes back." She was right, of course. The Night King was gone, but winter would return. People would die. The wheel of time would continue turning. But for now, for this moment, the world had been granted a reprieve. Bran Stark, the three-eyed raven, understood the deeper truth. The Night King had been created by the children of the forest as a weapon. He had been transformed into something beyond their control, beyond anyone's control. He was a reminder of what happens when desperation drives beings to create weapons they cannot unmake. The children had sought to save themselves and instead created the instrument of their own extinction. They had birthed a force that cared nothing for their original purpose, that developed its own terrible agenda. The Night King was not evil in the way that Joffrey was evil, or the Mad King, or even Cersei. Those rulers were driven by human emotions, cruelty, madness, ambition. They wanted power over others. The Night King wanted something far simpler and far more terrible: oblivion. He sought to extinguish life itself, to transform the warm, chaotic, beautiful world of the living into frozen silence. He did not hate humanity. Hatred would have been too human. He simply viewed all warm-blooded creatures as things to be converted, problems to be solved, obstacles to be removed. That was what made him the greatest threat Westeros had ever faced. Tyrants could be overthrown. Mad kings could be assassinated. Conquering armies could be defeated. But the Night King represented something more fundamental. He was entropy given form. The heat death of the universe made manifest. The inevitable end of all things. Fighting him was not about kingdoms or crowns or thrones. It was about the fundamental right of life to continue existing. Every petty war that had consumed Westeros, every political scheme, every betrayal and alliance, meant nothing compared to the existential threat he posed. A man could survive a bad king. A kingdom could recover from a war. But there was no recovering from the long night. The Night King's defeat did not come from superior armies or better tactics. It came from understanding what he truly was. Bran had served as bait, drawing the Night King into the open, making him vulnerable. Arya had delivered the killing blow, but the victory belonged to everyone who had stood against the darkness. The wildlings who had set aside ancient hatreds to fight alongside the Night's Watch. The knights who had ridden north despite thinking the threat was superstition. Daenerys, who had lost a dragon child to save people she had never met. Jon Snow, who had spent years warning anyone who would listen. Even Theon Greyjoy, broken and redeemed, who had bought precious seconds with his life. The Night King's defeat was not the triumph of one hero. It was the triumph of the living's refusal to surrender to extinction. In the years that followed, as Westeros rebuilt and moved forward, the story of the Long Night would be told and retold. Some would embellish it, adding details that never happened. Others would downplay it, unable to accept how close they had come to annihilation. But those who had been there, who had fought on the walls of Winterfell, who had seen the tide of dead crash against the living, would remember the truth. They would remember the darkness. They would remember the cold. They would remember standing against impossible odds, because the alternative was the end of everything. And they would remember that the Night King, for all his terrible power, had one weakness that ultimately destroyed him. He did not understand the living. He comprehended death perfectly. He wielded it with absolute mastery. But life, with all its messy chaos and unpredictable choices, remained alien to him. He could not have predicted that a girl trained as an assassin would leap from a tree. He could not have anticipated that enemies would unite against him. He could not have imagined that fragile, mortal beings would choose to fight rather than flee, would sacrifice themselves for others, would stand together against the dark. Because those were choices made by living beings. And the Night King, for 8,000 years, had not truly been alive. He was winter made manifest. The silence that follows the last breath, the cold that remains when warmth dies. But winter always ends. Spring always returns. Life, for all its fragility, has proven more resilient than death. The Night King had been defeated before, 8,000 years ago. He had waited patiently for his return, had built his army, had claimed a dragon, had broken the wall itself. And still, he had fallen. Not because the living were stronger, but because they refused to surrender. Because they chose, again and again, to fight for one more day, one more moment, one more chance to see the sun rise. In the end, that was the lesson of the Night King. The greatest threats are not always the cruelest or the most ambitious. They are the ones that seek to extinguish hope itself, to transform the world into silence and cold. They are the forces that do not negotiate, do not compromise, do not show mercy. Against such threats, the only response is to stand together, to set aside petty differences, to remember that beneath all the politics and schemes and rivalries, there is something worth fighting for. Life. Messy, chaotic, beautiful life. The Night King was gone. His army had shattered. The long night had ended, but winter would come again. It always did. And when it returned, when the cold winds began to blow and the days grew short, the survivors of Winterfell would remember what they had learned. That the greatest threats come not from the south, not from across the sea, but from the north, where ancient evils wait in patient silence. That the wars that truly matter are not fought for crowns, but for survival. That the greatest victories are not won by kings and queens, but by ordinary people who refuse to surrender to darkness. The Night King had been the greatest threat in Westeros history. and the living had defeated him. Not with prophecy or ancient weapons or divine intervention, but with courage, with sacrifice, with the stubborn refusal to accept extinction. Arya Stark had driven the dagger home, but humanity itself had won the war. The fires of Winterfell burned long into the night, cremating the countless dead who had fallen in the battle against extinction. The smoke rose into the stars, carrying with it the souls of heroes and common folk alike, all of whom had stood against the darkness. In the Godswood, where the Night King had shattered into ice and memory, new snow began to fall, soft and gentle, nothing like the blizzard that had accompanied the army of the dead. This was natural snow, winter's reminder that not all cold brings death. The survivors would carry scars, both visible and hidden. They would wake in the night, hearing phantom screams of the dead. They would flinch at unexpected shadows. The trauma of facing extinction would mark them forever, but they would also carry something else. Hope, the knowledge that even the most ancient evil could be defeated, that even the most impossible odds could be overcome, that life, fragile and fleeting as it might be, possessed a strength that death could never match. The Night King had sought to erase humanity from existence, to transform the world into frozen silence. He had wielded powers beyond mortal comprehension, commanded armies that grew with every victory, and possessed patience measured in millennia. Yet a young woman with a dagger had ended him in a heartbeat, because that is the nature of life. Unpredictable, defiant, resilient beyond all reason, the Game of Thrones would continue. Cersei still sat on the Iron Throne in King's Landing. Daenerys still sought to reclaim her birthright. Political machinations would resume. Wars would be fought. Alliances would shift. But those who had fought at Winterfell would remember what truly mattered. They had seen the real enemy. They had faced the actual threat. And everything else, all the crowns and kingdoms and power struggles, seemed smaller in comparison. The Night King was gone, but his legacy remained, a reminder that the greatest dangers often come not from human ambition or cruelty, but from forces that transcend humanity entirely, that seek not to rule, but to annihilate, that cannot be reasoned with, only fought. And when such threats arise, the only hope lies in unity, in setting aside differences, in standing together against the darkness regardless of the cost. The long night had ended, but the lessons it taught would endure. Winter had come, and winter had been defeated. But, as every Stark knows, as the ancient words remind all who hear them, winter is not gone forever. It will come again. And when it does, the living must be ready. Ready to fight, ready to sacrifice, ready to stand together against the cold, because that is what it means to be alive, to face extinction and choose defiance, to stare into the void and refuse to blink, to know that death is inevitable and fight anyway. The Night King was the greatest threat Westeros had ever known, and humanity's greatest triumph was proving that even the most terrible darkness can't extinguish the light of those who refuse to surrender. The dawn had come, and with it, the promise that no matter how long or dark the night, morning always follows. Always.